I want to deal with an issue that's big for Wellingtonians and is again back in the headlines after a report concerning a $51 million cock-up by the people who run Wellington's water system in the way they reported some liability and problems to the regional council. And massive calls last week for, commissioners or something to be done. And once again, much wringing of hands and clutching in pearls over the state of Wellington and wider Wellington's water infrastructure. It seems things are building to a head, and it certainly seems from the coverage I'm reading that things are getting very political and very tensile, or very tense. So to find out what the latest scandal was in reality, and to figure out where Wellington's water is at, I thought the best person to talk to would be, and let me get this right, is he's the chair of the board of Wellington Water now, Nick Leggett, and he joins us on the line now. Nick, how are you?
Hi, Sean.
I've got your title right there?
Yeah, you have.
Yeah.
For my sins.
Yeah. Another crappy week last week, let's be honest. The sort of headlines that if you're running or chair of an organisation you do not want to read. Were those headlines, was the reporting of that stuff up accurate and fair?
Yeah, it was absolutely not the headlines we wanted. But I'll say this, what we did want was to be upfront about, I thought you accurately described it as a cock-up, and there's no stepping away from that. I think it's good to actually have just a little bit more time than usual in a media interview to talk about what happened. Wellington Water Limited is a company that's owned by 6 of the councils in the region, and it's obviously to provide advice to those councils on their 3 waters, on their wastewater, their freshwater provision, and then the stormwater. And the company provides advice on the assets and suggests to council how much they invest, and then the councils decide and they allocate the money. Wellington Water doesn't seek to make a profit. It's a council-controlled organisation, and to operate, what it does is it takes a fee as a percentage of every dollar it spends for those councils, and that goes back into paying staff and keeping the lights on. This year, in the preparation for those 10-year plans, those long-term plans that councils do, when the budgets, the assets budgets were put together, one would say is a rudimentary mistake was made, in that fee was not calculated as part of those budgets. So essentially, Wellington Water failed to allocate.
You forgot to pay yourselves.
Yep, we forgot to allocate that money across those 10-year plans, or at least some of it, not all of it. And that 51 million that's up in headlights is actually money that the organisation would take to keep itself going, as you say, pay itself. And it's not fatal in itself. It's embarrassing and silly. It will have a consequence. You can't step away from that. What it's going to mean is that some projects take longer. Some are going to be delayed because there's going to be an additional cost to some of those projects. But I would say this, Sean, the Wellington Water model is at an end of its life, right? Nobody disagrees with that. It's not sustainable into the future, and that's why the government's local water done well is going to happen and take us over. We're going to be reformed, and we're waiting for the councils of the region. They're working on what the new model looks like, and Wellington Water will essentially fold into a company with a lot more functions because it will own its own assets. The councils at the moment are the asset owners. They make the final decisions. They are pretty stuck where it comes to the amount of money they can spend. A new company will hopefully have more flexibility because it will be able to borrow
more expertise, more critical mass, better accounting.
That's better accounting. All those better functions that we've identified need work. And people say, well, why has this happened? And it's the fairest question on the table. Look, it's happened. The report said a couple of things. The first is that this is a company that's grown quite quickly. It hasn't had the investment in those functions that you would expect in a company that's now much bigger. It's got around 400 staff. But to give you an example, 7 years ago, it was delivering about $50 million a year in capital projects, so putting in, replacing, big pipe infrastructure or replacing, reservoirs. Last financial year, it did $330 million.
Right, that's huge.
So that
growth
from 50 million to 330. Now, these are not excuses, Sean. They're just reasons. And so that growth, there's sort of been bolt-ons. If you think about the finance function, which is on the headlights here, those sort of things, they haven't grown. They're still running, in some cases, systems and processes that should have grown and should have matured as the company grew.
But they have not.
And so now, but they haven't. And so in many cases, they haven't.
Okay, and as chair of the board, do you accept responsibility for that?
Yeah, I how can you not?
Okay, well, Nick, there's an obvious thing to do when you accept responsibility, and are you going to do it?
There is. You either go or you fix it. And Sean, I've been the confirmed chair of the board since September last year. We've got a very good board in place now, and of 5 of us that are, have got experience and can fix this problem. That's what we want to do, because the other part of this issue has been culture. And Sean, the thing about culture, it's a hard thing to put your finger on, isn't it? But people, there's a culture of that hasn't been willing to talk about problems within the company and elevate those problems to where they should have been. So when this was discovered, nobody took responsibility to actually push it up the chain. And you'll see in this report, the board didn't get the information it needed. It asked, it didn't get the full picture. And that, the board has to be responsible, but it also has to get the information it needs.
So you're not resigning, Nick? You're going to stay and fix it?
No, I'm not resigning. I'm going to stay and fix it.